Ahoy, you salty sailors. Time to raise anchor and set sail for your best scrawny life. Arrgh! Alright, Ledges State Park, and one of the mushrooms I was hoping to find, one of the most unusual we have around here, Paragyrodon sphaerosporus, the leathery veiled bolete. This is a bolete in spite of the unusual veil it has. Once we cut this open, you will see that the undersurface is actually a partial veil that fully covers the pore layer, the hymenium, as it's developing. But once it's developed, the veil tears and allows the hymenium to release spores. There is sometimes a beetle that associates with this mushroom as well. I don't see it in this particular one. And it does develop a brown stain when sliced open and exposed to air. Here's Boletus variopes. There's a look at the reticulation pattern on the stem. The bugs have had a little munch at this one. And Gyroporus castaneus. There is reportedly a poisonous version of this mushroom in Europe, but I've eaten the ones here many times and had no ill effects. It's a tasty mushroom, and usually the pore layer is so thin it doesn't need to be removed when it's eaten. Large white oak, and looking down around the base of it, we do have a flush of chanterelles. Now here's the thing about our chanterelles. When genetic testing first came on the scene, we had an explosion of new species. But this one could fall under the category of flavus, or it could, with the yellow stem, or it could fall under the category of phasmatis with the white hymenium. So it's really hard to say. I think we'll eventually move back towards a more traditional definition of species, where it's possible that these two species could interbreed with each other, in which case there would only be a single species or a complex. Here is a Boletus variopes. The insects have not completely destroyed it, even at the large size that it is. So I believe we'll take that home. Pore layer just starting to show a little yellow. Red-capped bolete. This is possibly Rubroboletus rhodosanguineus. It seems to the pore layer is red, but it doesn't seem to have some of the characteristics of Boletus rubroflammeus. The reticulation is not as developed. It has seemingly some more yellow, and the bluing reaction a little bit slower. So, and it doesn't have the yellow pore surface that pseudo tricenteroides would have. Here's a bolete that's become infected with Hypomyces chrysospermus mold. And here's Lactarius argilocephalius. You'll notice that lobe creating tendency around the margins of the cap, and also that the cap is not just a flat gray. It has some pinkish or purplish notes to it, as well as being sort of tan in some places as well. So when it's originally cut, the latex is a white to somewhat cream colored. And I stuck it in my bag and didn't look at it until hours later when I got home, and was sort of surprised to see that it had darkened almost to black, and a very dark brown there. So this is possibly Lactarius Maculatipes. You'll see it has some potholes on the stem, just little gaps in the material of the stem that you would not necessarily see with Pipparatus or Samicola. Plus the lack of concentric zoning kind of points away from those options. This is one of the fetid russulas. It did have quite a smell to it. Sort of sweet, but also acrid, sort of like burning plastic or poison of some sort. Not entirely sure on the species of this, possibly Cerulans. This we will call Russula densifolia. You'll see that those blackening tendencies on the cap and the densely packed gills underneath. Sort of dark. It's darker toward the center of the cap. Now the red-capped russulas are beginning to emerge, and there's a whole suite of them that are nearly identical to each other. The namesake one, Russula emetica, is a poisonous mushroom, although it induces vomiting to such a degree that you cannot poison yourself with it because you can't keep it down long enough. Here is one of the Hydrophanous cortinarius. Possibly rubripes. The brightly colored patch at the base of the stem is not entirely red, sort of a reddish orange. There you can see the hydrophanous cap. That means that it changes color when it's wet. You can see it's partially dried out, so it looks sort of two-toned. There is a baby amanita just emerged from the universal veil. That becomes this, where those universal veil remnants have cracked. And this becomes that, which is the fully mature amanita with the bulge, the remnant of the egg phase at the base of the stem, the annulus, or partial veil broken around the stem, and the flex, the remains of the universal veil on the cap. This is possibly Citrina, not entirely sure about the species on this one. Very possibly poisonous. I don't eat any of the amanitas. It's only a mushroom. There's no mushroom that's so tasty it's worth risking your life over. So I avoid eating any amanitas. I need to get better at adjusting the exposure settings on my camera, but there you can see the just emerging from the universal veil. There's the veil is expanded. I mean, the cap is expanded a little bit more in this one. And there's the fully mature mushroom. Those are the stages of amanita development. So here we are at the famous Ledges flood pole. 2018 was quite a year. It was, the entire lower section was covered, was flooded. You'll see there's two markers for 2018. There was water all the way up to the bottom of the Highway 30 bridge in Boone. And the whole lower area of Ledges was flooded, but the upper area was just completely covered with mushrooms. Never seen anything like it. And of course, way at the very top, 1993, the big flood year. There's a Kentucky coffee tree. That's our plant for this episode. One of the more unusual and rare trees we have in Iowa. Alright, so on to the cooking. We're peeling away the core layer of the large boletes. And then we'll chop it into small pieces. I only have some bucatini pasta in the pantry, so not really the shape you want to do with a mushroom dish, but we'll make do by chopping them all up rather fine. And we're going to put in some onions. Now you can see the water that immediately comes out of the mushrooms and the onions. You want to continue cooking with just a little bit of oil until all of the water is gone. Only then are you going to develop some browning on the mushrooms and on the onions, and that's what's going to develop those richer flavors. So a little pasta water goes in. That will help emulsify the starch in that pasta water, will help emulsify the oil into a sauce. And we'll grate in a little Parmigiano Reggiano, stir that in, and it will help emulsify that as well. And then a little more on top to finish. Now here we are on the Des Moines River near Fort Dodge, just upstream from Fort Dodge. I had some trouble with the drone. It was very lightly raining, and I think maybe a raindrop had fallen on it. It's not a waterproof drone, so it kind of locked up, but it didn't crash. And the Fort Dodge Airport is not too far from here, so I was under an elevation restriction. There's some of the bluffs you can see there. This is one of the steeper gradient rivers we have, and the current is quite strong there. Here you can see the coal-marl boundary is quite sharp. The marl, you can see, is very dense, almost like stone. And above the coal, that's where the glacial material is, the glacial till. It's not that red clay like you saw in southeastern Iowa. This is glacial till, the sand, gravel. We have some of the larger boulders, the glacial erratics. The ones lying out in the riverbed and so forth have all come out of that layer as it eroded away. Now the marl is often more or less impermeable to water because it's so dense. But here's some that some water has percolated through. You can see it's a pure inorganic clay, but it is often contaminated. Since you're harvesting it at the surface, it is also contaminated with the coal that is above it, and that could be a problem for ceramic use. I think if you pushed it through a screen, it would only just crush the coal up into finer bits. Not really sure how you might be able to separate the two. So we did a little fishing out there. I'd gone down the first couple of runs and only had a little smallmouth to show for my effort, and came to this eddy pool below the bluffs, and actually struck out there, and I got the microscadget rod snagged on a rock. So I switched over to a small pike fly and went down to the next little pool along those bluffs, and a walleye popped right off the bottom and just ate that fly like a bass would. So pretty stoked about that. Walleye on the fly rod. When you can make it happen, it's kind of cool. There was a carp feeding nearby, a huge carp, great big old ragged tail and everything. But what often happens is other species of fish will shadow a feeding carp and eat the crayfish and so forth that it stirs up off the bottom and doesn't get itself. So I cast to it, but I never caught the carp. But smallmouth and a couple small catfish took it, and that last catfish finally spooked it away.